Hi YouTube, welcome to the channel. I'm Ali. Today we're going to be looking at the continuation of my adventure back into painting miniatures, specifically these Citadel metal miniatures from 30 odd years ago. I've stripped the paint off them and I'm ready to apply new paint, but just before I do that I've got one final step, and that is to clean up any mold or flash lines that appear on here, or any bits of flashing in fact. And I'll explain exactly what that is straight after these start intro credit things. So, metal miniatures were made out of two materials, lead and tin predominantly. Later they also used antimony, which is incredibly poisonous, but allows for really fine details on the miniatures. But right now I suspect these are lead and tin alloys. If you had more lead than tin, you ended up with a darker mini, like my little goblin here. If it was more tin than lead, you ended up with a lighter mini, like these two. Okay, the process of building a mini, let's talk about that. Miniatures back in the day, and I suspect even till quite recent times before we moved over to resin, were made by being cast, that is poured into mould, and in fact I think resin miniatures still are. That casting process basically has two halves of a mould, and you put them together. There's a little hole that you pour the material, the alloy, into. So this Goblin Fanatic would have been two halves, and you can tell it's two halves because lo and behold, on the back you'll see a line. Let me bring that into focus, there we go. A line which is a seam line. Now that seam line runs all the way along the miniature, and you can just see that it also goes down into the base there. If I look on the Targeteer, we'll see a similar thing. Its seam line is a little harder to see, but I shall try my best. It's on the bow and it runs over his hands and it's just following up here. And that's where the two halves of the mould were joined together. Where the mixture was poured in, you ended up with a little extra blob of material, and that blob is often referred to as flash or flashing. In the old days you would have these slotted bases or these hard bases, and a lot of the times your pouring channel would start from there, so you wouldn't actually have too much flash. I suspect there was probably a support piece there when this miniature first came, again made of the same material but used to just support the bow, and I must have taken that off way back when. Anyway, why am I telling all this? I'm telling you all this because it has to be removed. It needs to be taken off. To the naked eye right now, you don't really notice these imperfections. As soon as you put paint on them, they become very apparent. And I've gone through each of these miniatures quite carefully to look for little blobs and extra bits that might be there, and I have noticed a few. I'm just going to pick the Targeteer up again, right on the tip of the hat. Again, I'm out of focus, but right on the tip of the hat there's a little blob that's sticking out. Doesn't look too bad here. There's one right on his elbow here. The point is, these are really small little blobs, but they will really be emphasized when they're painted, so they need to be removed. Now when it comes to the actual tools, there are three that everyone tells you to go get. The first is these sort of clippers. These are the things you use to cut off the big bits of flashing. Like I said, I'm revisiting models here, so I don't need to cut anything big off. I won't be using these clippers. Again, I bought these as part of a pack. They cost me a couple of pounds. Games Workshop I think sell them at 20 bucks, which is I think way more than you need to pay. But anyway, let's move those out of the way. The other thing everyone tells you that you'll need is a sharp knife, and I got a craft knife with good old Sheffield steel. Definitely used for this bit of the project. The other thing that they'll tell you to get is some files, or are some files. I got these files from Amazon again. They were a couple of bucks.
Key thing to remember about the files was that actually you can take off quite a lot of material, especially on the Goblin, so you've got to be a little bit more gentle with these, but they came in really good little shapes. You were able to get into all kinds of nooks and crannies and really give those miniatures a good rub down. Have to be gentle though, got to stress that. I wasn't to begin with, and very quickly learned that you needed to be.
Two secret sort of bits of tooling that I thought I'd share with you is firstly a nail file, but this was really useful in sort of rubbing away the seams on rounded edges. So where I had the space to move, this was really good because it got rid of the roughness without too much too many problems, and it kind of made things pretty smooth, pretty easily. So absolute joy to work with that thing. Joy to work with? I don't think it was a joy to work with. Anyway, the other secret little thing I had was blue tack, or poster putty, I think it's called in America. This stuff was awesome. It allowed me to do two things which I really liked. Of course, I've got a cutting mat. I forgot to mention the cutting mat. 4 things that everyone tells you to get includes a cutting mat, and this one, like I said, was a couple of bucks again from Amazon. I got this all as a pack, and I'll maybe put a link into the description in case you're interested. Cutting putty is awesome. It allows you to hold the mini in place, but it also allows you to cut into it with a little bit more control than just having it hard against the surface of the mat. So I was putting my miniature into the putty and then using that to either file or cut or polish or whatever I wanted to do. That was really good. The other thing I noticed, or the other thing I found, once you'd rubbed it in your hands to warm it up a little, was that it was really good at supporting those weak points. So I would push the mini into here, for example, in such a way, that's not a good example, there we go, let's just move it there, in such a way as to support that bow. And now I could scrape along it and remove that flashing kind of a little bit more comfortably. Oh, let's talk about the scraping process, shall we? Yes, let's, Ali. I don't know who I'm talking to. Anyway, I digress. Well, the truth of it is, there's plenty of information on the internet to tell you how to do this, and everyone says the same thing. Take your blade, run it parallel to the actual seam, and gently go up and down. Gentle is the optimal word there. You've got to be really cautious and careful. I found that I got bored quite quickly, as I always do, and I wanted to go harder and harder to get rid of stuff. But honestly, the best way of getting rid of the seam was to just very gently, over and over again, stroke the seam line away. And that's exactly what I'm trying to do here, which I hope you can see. If I had the space, I'd take out my little nail file, massive nail file, and I'd gently sort of buff it. Again, very gently. I'm brushing it more than anything. And you can see there's specks of metal coming off from that scraping. Now, once again, I could do a speed run through of how I did this, but I'm not sure it's going to make gripping viewing. So I'm just going to crack on and do that and end up with 4 miniatures, hopefully 3 miniatures, sorry, that I'm ready to paint. Alright, so I've finally got my miniatures nice and clean, I've removed all the paint, and I've taken away any mould or flash lines on there too. I really do think finally I'm ready to apply some paint. But of course, before I put on the real colours of paint, I need to put on a primer and an undercoat. And in fact, that's the next thing I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be investigating whether I need to do a primer and an undercoat, whether they can get one and the same thing, and whether or not the colour matters. While I go off and research that, go ahead and enjoy the rest of the internet. But before you go, please do subscribe and like this video if you can. I'd appreciate it. Until next time then, guys, take care.